Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be in this very warm atmosphere in your school and in this lovely city of Skopje with young people. And let's start about the timely character of Saint Maximus. There's an ongoing interest in Saint Maximus in the last decades, and the reason for this is arguably the fact that he has a very extended anthropology. The thought of St. Maximus contains a very detailed anthropology concerning psychology, the faculties of the soul, the importance of the body, many psychological insights. And he did connect this with Christology and with dogmatic theology. So in the modern and postmodern world where there is an emphasis on humanity, he's a father who gives a lot of material for that. For this reason, there are many conferences around the world. There are at least one or two big conferences each year, and many volumes coming out of these conferences, and in general, very many monographs. If we are to put Saint Maximus in the history of philosophy, in the history of Christian thought, what is important is that he's one thinker who has spoke about the will as a distinct faculty of the human soul. This happened in the East with St. Maximus the Confessor, and in the West with St. Augustine of Hippo. So in this sense, St. Maximus inaugurates a sort of philosophy of the will as a distinct faculty of the soul in a particular way in the East, and St. Augustine does that in a particular way in the West. Both of them, in this sense, are very modern, because if the will is the characteristic of modernity through voluntarism, through the notion that humanity can proceed through this extension of the will, through willing new things and lead this to progress, then these two thinkers, St. Maximus and St. Augustine, are somehow precursors of modernity inside the Middle Ages or the Christian ages. But they do it in a different way. So at the same time, St. Maximus is like the inaugurator of the Orthodox hesychast mentality. What was the context? It was a Christological context. We are in the 7th century. In this century is the rise of Islam. St. Maximus is a contemporary of Muhammad, of Prophet Muhammad. So we have in the first case the war between the Byzantine and the Persians, and then we have the Arab invasions. This is the first time when the Mediterranean is, after many centuries, the Mediterranean is broken into a Muslim and a Christian part. So we have the destruction of the homogeneous Greek-Roman ecumene, Greek-Roman world. And St. Maximus has to be a refugee in various countries like Tunisia, Italy, and then to Thrace in the Balkans, and then he dies in Georgia, in modern Georgia. So he's like a Ulysses. He has a trip, a necessitated trip all around the Mediterranean. At that time, the emperor wants to have a compromise in order to save Byzantium. The compromise will be between the Constantinopolitan mentality, which speaks about the two natures of Christ, and on the other hand, the mentality of which is dominant in Egypt and in the Middle East, which speaks about the one nature of the union of humanity and divinity, in a sense that this means, let's say, a very close union without distinction. So the Emperor Heraclius has proposed a compromise, which could be that Christ has two natures, but he has one will, only one will, which is the divine will, the dominant will, or or an assimilation of the human will to form a divine human will. Saint Maximus reacted to that, and his position was that human will is an indispensable part of the human soul, so it must be saved as human. So Christ must have two wills, one divine and one human, and this is due to this Christological discussion, this is very important because he turned the will into something indispensable for the human soul. He made the will something equally important with the intellect, so the intellect and the will in St. Maximus are two equally important faculties. When we turn into God, this is an act of intellection, but also an act of desire, an act of willing and desiring. And he has spoken about the natural will in the sense that the natural will is an urge for a fuller life, for a life that is complete. So this natural will is produced in man from the fact that we might be mortals and beings who have limited beings, but at the same time we have an urge, a desire, a will for infinity, for complete life, for full life, and this constitutes our progress. In this sense, St. Maximus is quite modern. He could be compared to Schopenhauer or to Friedrich Nietzsche, but he does this in a Christian way, distinguishing on the one hand between the natural will, which is this urge for infinity, and on the other hand, what he termed gnomic will. The gnomic will is very important for political philosophy also, because the gnomic will is a will that is due to the fragmentation of nature. In a Christian setting, let's say after the fall, or in other words, before the eschatological full salvation, there is a fragmentation of nature. This fragmentation of nature leads to people having different opinions, but also having different individual wills, which are formed by the fact that each one of us has a particular point of view due to the fragmentation of our nature. St. Maximus does not condemn that. He sees that as something that is pertaining to the created nature of man, but he says that Christ does not have this gnomic will, because Christ has the divine point of view, so to speak. He does have a human nature and human will, but he does not have, there are two kinds of gnomic will. When we have a gnomic will, this means when we have an individual point of view, this might be something irreproachable, something saintly, or it might be something, let's say, sinful or something evil. The individual will is good when we start from this and we strive for love, for Catholicity, for universality, and for a fuller life. It is a sin when we don't want to know, because of our interest. This is sinful. For example, if there is an exploitation, if someone is exploited, and for example, if I eat my good steak, now we have the beginning of the fast today. If I eat, let's say, the meat, my good steak or hamburger, and I don't want to know that this is produced by torturing animals in a very difficult circumstances, this is somehow a sinful ignorance, because I don't want to know. it is a sinful point of view, a sinful individual point of view. When I might enter into politics in a democracy and I don't want to know the view of the other parties, this is somehow sinful. If I want to know the views of the others, but I think that my opinion is better, then this is something virtuous. But we need to have a sort of virtuous, let's say, curiosity, because the meaning of humanity is Catholicity. The meaning of humanity is the communication, the contact, arriving at fuller. So by this distinction, St. Maximus has done his own proper synthesis. The point of the synthesis is that you cannot have salvation and full humanity without willing it, without desiring it, without entering into a lifelong journey between our lacks and our finitude and mortality, and on the other hand, our urge for infinity, for immortality, and for Catholicity. But on the other hand, in all this, the human nature, even if it is created or mortal or with finitude, finite, it is in an alliance. It is in a cooperation with God. There is no dualism in Christ, because his human nature is in full cooperation with the Divine One. At the same time, there is this gnomic will, which pertains to created persons, like humans, and this created mode of willing, which is their so-called gnomic will, the Christ did not have it, because the Christ is a divine person. However, when humans have the gnomic will, it might be virtuous, but it turns into a fallen mode of willing, or into a sinful mode of willing, when we use that as a cover for our not wanting to know, when we don't want to know, in order not to become Catholic, not to become universal, but to stay in our own prejudice. I think that this aspect of the Maximian thought is very timely in our postmodern world, where we have all these fake news. For example, for St. Maximus, if you see an artificial intelligence product and you don't want to know if it is real or if it is fake, that would be a sinful gnomic willing. If you want to know, if you see, so basically, I finish with this sentence. Thank you for your patience. Basically, this vision is a vision of pluralism, as long as this pluralism has a common horizon of meaning. Pluralism is good as long as we have a common horizon of meaning. What is bad is to have pluralism as an end in itself, or to have meaning as totalitarianism. The good synthesis is to have pluralism, but inside a common effort for a common horizon of meaning. Thank you for your...
Thank you so much for your lecture, for your part of the lecture. And I think that you will have to leave us. You will be in the building.
Yes.
With us.
Yes, I will be corporeally with you.
Yes.
In the building, but
all right.
mentally...
I will join you. I will just introduce
yes.
Sotiri's Mitalexis now for his part of the lecture, and I will be back in 5 minutes. So I will just leave you short.
Okay, no problem.
Help Dionisios and
connect. Yes. So greetings. Thank you very much for coming. A big thank you to the faculty, and I wish that you in your lives become recipients of hospitality so warm and cordial as the Reverend Professor Milan Georgievich gave us. So we are very grateful, etc. Now, there is a seeming paradox, as it were, in figures such as Maximus the Confessor, 7th century again, because they are remembered by the Church for different reasons than what the work itself might afford, might offer. For example, all fathers, almost all of the fathers of the Church, are remembered by the Church because of their part in a resolution of a doctrinal problem. And the doctrinal problem emerges when there is strife, when there is division, when there is schism or a pre-schism situation. So this father helped in the Trinity, that father helped in Christ's full divinity apart from his full humanity, and Maximus is remembered on, as Dr. Sklirис said, the question of the will. The question of the will, and then after his saintly repose in the Sixth Ecumenical Council, on the doctrine on the will. However, Maximus had quite a few more things to say in his works. Please note, however, that his works are not like Aquinas' works or Aristotle's works, etc., in the sense that I start to write a book or a treatise on a particular topic, De Incarnatione, on the Incarnation. No, or Summa Theologiae, the whole of theology, or this or that or that. Maximus's huge work is comprised of letters, of smaller treatises, to that person that asks him about difficulties in the church fathers like the Ambigua, to Thalassius who asks him about problematic, difficult biblical fragments, etc. So you have a thinker who has practically constructed a full system of thought that's not on the will in particular, but this is why the church remembers him. This is why he's important for church history. But as a thinker, as a philosopher and theologian, he was truly comprehensive and quite a mind. Now this is being retrieved during the last 70 years, I would say, by scholarship, not only in theology, not only in Byzantine studies, also in philosophy as well, for all these other facets that were not the primary reason why the church remembers him. And we have, since the 50s, a torrent of books that examine his thought, and he emerges as a Christian Aristotle, if you'd like. Let me just mention two examples on this, complementing on what Dr. Skliris says. But let's start with a problem. In classical Greek philosophy, we have a world that is simply there. It did not begin at a certain time. It did not come to be. It will not be annihilated at a certain time. It was just there. With Christianity, we have creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. So also creation in time, or in any case, a time when creation started. And apart from that, we have a different reality, which is the uncreated God. So we have suddenly a created-uncreated distinction. All that we know, all existence, all reality is only a part of the whole, because the other part is God. And God only. Only God is the uncreated God, etc. So we have a language in order to understand each other during all those years of the development of Christian thought. This speaks, for example, of the particular existence. This is borrowed from philosophy, the particular existences of things. This cat or that cat, Garfield the cat or Father Milan the professor. And we also have the answer to the question, what makes a cat a cat? We would say catness or humanity in the case of human beings. This we term in Christian thought, borrowing from philosophical thought, the question of the particulars, hypostasis, and of the general, the universalium, the nature or substance of being. So catness is the substance of cats, the nature of cats, the answer to the question, what is this? It is a cat. And Garfield the cat is the particular hypostasis. Of course, we utilize this language also for God when speaking about divinity as not simply one essence, one being, but first and foremost a trinity of hypostases, of particular beings, in their Trinitarian interpenetration. So, what's the problem here? What are these natures, these hypostases, these natures, these substances, humanity, katness, etc.? Obviously, this must be also created, otherwise they would be gods. We do not have a second world beyond createdness. Okay, we have only God. So even these intangible things are created. By the way, when we talk about this, the intelligible reality, etc., we also speak of the domain of angels, etc., but not only and not necessarily, because also the number 3 is intangible, is intelligible. 3 oranges are 3 oranges, 3 buildings are 3 buildings, but 3 in itself is nowhere to be found. In Plato, we would say it is a Platonic idea. Okay. So all this is standard. It's not what Maximus brings in. But there is the question, okay, these created natures, these created generalia, universalia, humanity, in which Reverend Professor Millan is but one hypostasis, catness, in which Garfield the cat is but one hypostasis. How are these created, and what do they have in them as far as a divine breath, as it were, is concerned? Because in a more Platonic context, we would speak of the world of ideas, but this will not properly do in a Christian world if understood as Maximus would understand it. Then we would have a language of ideas in the mind of God. But the problem here is not that this idea is anthropomorphic, is that the brain generates ideas. If we speak about ideas in the mind of God, it is as if these creatures that come out of the mind of God, these ideas, are necessary beings and not beings willed by a willing existence, which is the guarantee for freedom. That's what you have in Neoplatonism. In Neoplatonism, you have the processions from the one that are more or less necessary. It's not that somebody willed them, so there is no freedom therein. So you have these two worlds, created and uncreated. You have Christ, which bridges them via his incarnation and then via his with his death and resurrection, because he's a real being that is at once uncreated by being God and created by being also human. But is there any other way for those two worlds to be connected? And Maximus speaks of the logoi, a Greek word. Logos, of course, is the person of Jesus Christ. And logoi as a word has a staggering polysemy in Greek. It means speaking. It also means a number of different things. For example, the mathematical ratio. It means a relationship that makes something known. For example, what is the relationship between 6 divided by 2? It's 3. This is the logos of 6 to 2. And it means a number of different things. Also, when Maximus speaks of the logoi, what we recall is Genesis. God said, and things were created, with the exception of humanity, of Adam and then Adam and Eve, etc. So, what do you have there? You have the substance, the general, the universal, humanity. But also you have the particular will and utterance of God for things to exist, both the universals and the particulars, that student, this cat, this professor, etc. This will, this utterance of God, first of all, it is not a thing. So we speak of something that is uncreated. The logoi of beings are uncreated. But at the same time, we do not speak of things that are uncreated, because they are simply the wills and utterances, rather than the ideas in a mind that mechanically generates ideas. These are logi, wills and utterances for particular beings, but also for universals, that also are God's plan A for everything. These uncreated intentions behind and within universals and particulars are also how God would like things to develop. God has a plan, a logos, for humanity as a whole, but also for Reverend Professor Milan, for me, for you all, etc. And this is not simply a created thing, but God's active utterance, which is also not in time, not something that happened and stopped being. It's an active logos. All the logi together are like pieces, tessera of a mosaic, because the person of Christ recapitulates all of the logoi. All of God's utterances and intentions for everything are recapitulated in the primary logos, the logos of God the Father, that is Christ. So you can imagine reality also as a mosaic in which particular bits and pieces include the wills and utterances of God for everything. But if you look from afar, the mosaic is the person of Christ, which recapitulates everything. And humanity is a microcosm and mediator between that. Now there are two or three other things that, in this introductory overview of only this part of Maximus' extremely fecund and fertile mind, may be said. First of all, what this tells us about history and the value of history and our personal histories and history writ large. You have a protology, God's intention, will and utterance for beings. Then in history you have a mode of existence, logos, tropos. By the way, this was Dr. Sklir's PhD. Logos, tropos. You have the actual mode of existence, how we exist in actual life, within time. You have history, logos, the protology, then tropos, the mode of existence, how we exist. And then in the end times, when the real reality of being shall be disclosed, you have a synergy between those two. You don't have simply a return to God's initial utterance, as if history does not matter and did not exist, etc. You do not only have what is the end result of our mode of existence, the tropos, but you have a very dialectical thing, logos, tropos, telos, in which both the end, so you have a Hegel before Hegel in a certain way. You have this schema, logos, tropos, and the end where these are married. A third thing happens, not a return. Eschatology will be a surprise for us all. So, in the context of this Maximian way of thinking about logoi that disclose the Logos Christ and historical tropi modes, you have also a valorization of history. History writ large, but also our very personal histories, is not something that has no value, something which will be annulled in the eschata, but something which is also forms part of what we will see in the surprise that eschatology is. And there is also another thing, because the only rational, as it were, being on earth is humanity, human persons, that in that way we can see, and Father Nicholas Ludovicos has written extensively about this, also reality as a dialogue. God utters his logi, creates the world, and places humanity in it. Logi for everything. For the intelligible beings, for the universals, but also for particular beings. And then the human person, made in the image of God, and also humanity being the nature in which Christ was incarnated, has to respond with his own logi to God, with his own production of history, with his own life. So there's a dialogue. It's as if God tells humanity, and each one of us, I'm telling you this world. How do you respond? Will you help me save it? What will you do with this world? You are the microcosm of the whole world and you are called to be a mediator between the created nature, createdness, and the uncreated God. I speak to you. I send to you my logi. I literally speak to you with my logi. The uncreated wills, intentions, impulses within everything that we see. How do you respond? How do you take on the fate and responsibility of being the microcosm in the created order? So there is this dialogical reciprocity. Everything in this context, all created things, all fallen things, include within them, in the blueprint, not that the logi are, also a call, an invitation for a dialogue. Within everything, and a divine invitation for dialogue lurks, as it were. These are only some facets, some aspects of what one may find in Maximus. It is a thinker and a saint that has literally spoken about everything in a very systematic manner. It is a difficult thinker. For example, as the Reverend Professor recently mentioned, Maximus scholars gather together from all over the world once or twice a year, not to offer papers, not to have a dialogical reciprocity of prepared papers for one another. People from Oslo, from Belgrade, from the US, from London, but simply we have chosen certain very difficult texts by Maximus. We sit around a table and read them very closely and discuss about what this means, how this is to be interpreted, etc. So he is a difficult thinker, but a very rich thinker, even a thinker in from whom we can take insights for today and for novel problems, for problems of anthropology, for example, for problems even of gender, the whole gender discussion. There is literature on that, on Maximus, and opposing literature, different things. For example, there is a PhD in Harvard by a transgender priest on Maximus and sexual configuration in the eschata. So there is much to be said and much to be discussed. And you see the difference between the fertility, the fecundity of this thinker in domains such as philosophy, theology, Byzantine studies, and other things. Currently, there is a fellow Greek student in Cambridge, Alexandros Battalias, doing a PhD on AI, transhumanism, and Maximus the Confessor. And there was even an American that funded this. Somebody who thought that this is important enough for the insights that will result from it to fund AI, transhumanism, and Maximus the Confessor. If I had money, I would fund it as well. But alas. So you see that the Church remembers Church Fathers and thinkers for different reasons, for reasons that may diverge from what these thinkers have to say. Because the Church remembers fathers and figures apart from the holiness and the martyrdom or confession at some historical times and periods, for how they contributed to doctrine, to doctrinal problems, to solutions provided by ecumenical councils. But some of these fathers are mountains of philosophical value that are different, that may be a different story than why the Church remembers them in the development of its own logos. So there you have it. Many more things could be said, of course, on Maximus. I just opted to highlight two things. Dr. Skliri's opted to highlight the question of the will and to connect it with the philosophical discussion. So he opted to pick the topic for which Maximus is important in the Church and its doctrine, and see how this is not simply a question of the wills of Christ. The arcane, obscure question for many, does Christ have one or two wills? If we ask the average person, why is that important? They will answer, they will think it is weird that Christians would fight over whether Christ have one or two wills. But also Dr. Skliri's made you aware of the repercussions and the implications of this also for the human person, for what it means to be human and to will, and why this was novel. And I opted to highlight the logoi teaching or doctrine of Maximus, and why this brings also a very interesting dialogical reciprocity between the uncreated and the created order, even if you'd like a poetic dimension to that all, with this whole dialogical reciprocity and God speaking to the world and we having to respond with our history and history writ large, and all this stuff. But there is much more to say. If you take a book by Maximus and really read it, knowing that the terminology is obscure, so he's not simply throwing words around in the mystagogy that is on the church, but that he's constructing a system, as we would say today. And if you understand that titles can be misleading, for example, the mystagogy, a very well-known text. The mystagogy is on, how should we put it, a tutorial on the liturgy, ostensibly. That's what the title says. But if you really read it studiously, you will notice that in its complexity, it is much, much more than that. And, well, if I may name books that I like, the so-called Ambigua on difficulties with the church fathers is a cornucopia of insights on the metaphysical order of things, etc., and a very complex book, but a rewarding read. Note that one of the reasons why there is this recent interest in Maximus is that him being an Eastern father, a Greek father, although part of the common repository of patristics for both East and West, due to the fact that he was prior to the schism, English translations have been made properly available in the last 10 years. In the last 10 years. There was a guy that was a professor at Harvard. Then he left his post at Harvard Divinity School and became a monk in Simonopetra. Then Nicholas Constas, now Father Maximus Constas. And only by the grace of God is it possible that he really did translate the whole of the Ambigua and the whole of Ad Thalassium into English. Extremely demanding task. So now the international scholarly community does have also English translations to work with and on. And so that is why during the last 50 years in general, and during the last 50 years, and during the last 15 years in particular, the facets, the interesting things that one may draw from the study of Maximus becomes more apparent for a number of disciplines internationally. And the number of PhD theses on Maximus is on the rise, etc., etc., etc. There is so much in this thinker that has not been discovered as of yet. If you go in the patristics, conference in Oxford that happens every 5 years, Oxford 5 or 4, every few years, Oxford patristics, always, of course, the biggest father there, insofar as number of papers is concerned, is Augustine. But Augustine, being the foundational thinker for Western Christianity, Catholic and Protestant alike, has been studied in all his facets and details ad nauseam. I mean, people are studying Augustine for 15 centuries, more or less. The second father is Maximus, in numbers of papers. This was, for the last 15 years, this is demonstrably the case. But there, things are the other way around, because there is still so much more to be said. So, try your luck with Maximus at some point, with properly studying a text like the 10th Ambigua, which is a book in its own. The 10th answer in that book is a book of its own. And you will, your time will not go to waste. That's for me, but I'm open to discussions, etc.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. You were far away when I was telling the students that I wish you to be recipients of a hospitality so cordial like we received from you. So thank you very much, Father Middleton.
All thanks is ours. So we have time for discussion, and I hope that you have any questions or remarks or thoughts that you would like to share. I know that you are shy, you are humble, but you don't have to be always like this. So please. Може се како.
Тоа што учевме, што има професор да каже и како се Максим целосно ја самостојува христијанската филозофија.
Во ред. Концептуално те разбирам, ќе му го пренесам. Јасно. So he has a question about something that we spoke about on our classes, and that is the idea that Saint Maximus is a breaking point on the road of patristic philosophy, and that
Breaking point meaning in this context?
in the history of patristic philosophy. So until Saint Maximus, we have all the time the need to respond to the ancient philosophical tradition and to take the terms and concepts from there. Since Saint Maximus, certainly we have Photius and others who still consult the ancient philosophical tradition, but it is not something that you have to do in order to build the Christian philosophical system. You already have a system which is in a way finished or circled in Saint Maximus. So can you reflect on this idea? What can you say about this central position of Maximus on the road of the patristic philosophy?
I would say that it's largely true in the sense that Maximus' preoccupation was to respond to difficulties in the Church Fathers, as one book has it, or difficulties in Scripture, as another book has it, rather than to respond to classical philosophy, etc. On the other hand, there is an ongoing project up until even in Maximus, because you also have Neoplatonism. Is Maximus a Neoplatonic thinker? I would respond no, for a number of reasons. But the question itself needs to be further analyzed in order to any answer to this question to make any sense. What does Neoplatonism mean? And you do not simply have the distinction between, in the church, outside of the church, that all the thinkers in the church are X, Y, Z, and there are also these non-Christian thinkers that think otherwise. There is an immense and intense synergy, etc. So Maximus' preoccupation, rightly put and rightly said, is not to respond to antiquity. At the same time, it is using and refining the system that has already been built as an edifice, as it were, in a very original and careful way, because the project practically is ongoing in Maximus. Maximus will, in the good sense, twist certain things to a more Christian Maximian direction, understand certain problems before they emerge, as it were. Let me give you a very small example. Dr. Sklirис spoke about the natural and the gnomic will. What's this? That since the will is something that belongs to nature, to substance, to the universal, humanity, rather than to the particular, this human, natural will is the will of prelapsarian nature, but we also have a gnomic will, our own opinional will. Gnomi means opinion, etc. Now, what's the deal here? Gnomic will is not sinful will. Gnomic will is how we use the will in our mode of existence, in our personal history. So the aim is not to dispose of the gnomic will, because this is not aligned to the natural and as such as God intended will. Not to dispose of the gnomic will and simply take on the natural will, but to align the will we have with the prelapsarian natural will that God would intend. Why am I using this example? Because given that the problem was, how many wills does Christ have? You could simply refine a system, make a system, the will belongs to the nature, to the substance, not to the individual hypostasis. As such, Christ, being of two natures, has two wills, end of story. But then, if the gnomic will of the human person were to be considered simply sinful or to be thrown away, our personal histories would be annulled. So Maximus tries to solve one problem, but at the same time sees around the corner the other problem that will emerge if that theoretical sophistication were to be continued, and prevents that problem as well by opining on that. So the project of patristic philosophy, also vis-a-vis ancient categories, etc., is there still ongoing. But before Palamas, what are the other fathers after Maximus that would be extremely important? Obviously, St. John Damascene, on another set of questions and problems. But who else? Photius, yes, Photius. But apart from a breaking point, it's a very... it's as if providentially a thinker that was able to construct such a comprehensive system was placed at just the correct century. Yes. Let me put it thusly. Yes. It's almost suspicious that a thinker of such a comprehensive philosophical and theological system would, as it so happens, arrive just after the great Christological controversies, apart from his Christological controversy, monothelitism, had been resolved. So we had a system, as it were, that was quite refined. Then we would have other problems, and also historical problems with the Arab expansion, etc. Up until then, the Hesychast controversy, but the further refinement, took place at just the correct century. Let me put it thusly. So that's the turning point.
Yes, thank you. Still questions?
Or comments?
Or remarks?
I would like to ask about Logi, how it's the mode of being of Logi, how is it different from God's mode of being, because they are both uncreated?
First of all, mode of being in Maximus's vocabulary is a term reserved for history, for temporal beings. Temporal beings have a... The thing is that if we are to stay faithful to the Christian understanding, there can be no uncreated thing apart from God. Otherwise, we end up with a very problematically Platonic understanding in which there is practically we substitute the notion of the uncreated with a Platonic world of ideas where many different things are, etc., 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 etc. Christianity has a very strict apophaticism on that we cannot say things about the uncreated because there's also a different set of... We don't have its language. Christianity is very Wittgensteinian on that. Wittgenstein says the limits of my language are the limits of my world. It goes also the other way around. The limits of my created world are the limits of my language. I have no language to speak of the uncreated because it is truly, really uncreated, extremely different from everything that we know. There could be no common measure on both the uncreated. There is no bigger box that includes both the uncreated world and the created nature that we have. It is this radical alterity that this world that we occupy is not simply the world, but because it started being at some point, it was created. Yeah, sorry, apologies.
It was not exactly about the mode of being. I'm sorry, I made a mistake, but it's more...
No, but it's good to refine the...
As an attribute, you gave the attribute to the Logi that is also uncreated.
Yes.
We also give the same attribute to God that is uncreated. So how... I just want you to
Yes, yes, yes. But the thing is that instead of Maximus speaking, for example, he would also speak also about that, but not primarily, about ideas in the mind. This would be the alternative image, the alternative picture. Ideas in the mind of God. The main problem in this being that ideas simply emerge in one's mind, and it's not a willful act. Now, the logoi are not things, but are the logoi, that is, as the word in its polysemy entails. They are an utterance, a will, an intention of God. It is God's intentions for things to be.
But then they are created,
No, because they are the intentions. The things that will be created are created.
basically a possibility in God.
No.
I want to draft a paper. I want to write a paper. If I narrate the paper in my mind before writing it, it is, and if I were God, it is still created but intelligible. If I write it down, it is created and sensible. The example is problematic, but you get. My intention to write a paper is not a thing. My will to write a paper. My will to write a paper and the will for this paper to be good, etc. But what is here the thing is that this, because these logoi are here, are hidden in the things, in the beings, the intentions of God are hidden in the beings. This is also a kind of a bridge between createdness and the uncreated. Not a second bridge apart from Christ incarnate, but Christ himself, because the Logos recapitulates as a mosaic all the logoi. So if you meet Christ, meet in any, you also meet the logoi of everything. You also meet indirectly the whole of the world as God's intentions for it to exist. And if you meet a being, you can meet Christ via the being, because God's intention for that thing to be created is, but the intention is God, is not something. And all intentions together, all logoi together are Christ, the Logos. And another notion, another meaning of the word Logos is, we could philosophically, if you'd like, define it as the mode in which what is communicated and manifested. So Logos is also the manifestation of the Father. Christ, the Logos, is also the manifestation of the Father. He who has seen me has seen the Father. It's not possible to see the Father without seeing me. But also with the logoi, this is also another, in the polysemy of the word, meaning that fits well with this notion. When we try to meet the logoi, I didn't tell you something very important. Dear Father, I told you I wanted 2 coffees before the lecture.
But you got one double.
I'm obviously. All this is not a philosophical theory for Maximus. It is also an ascetic plan, a plan for asceticism and deification, which has 3 components. The first is practical philosophy. Practical philosophy is cleansing oneself by ascesis from the passions. Because if you have the passions, you cannot go further. What is the further? The second, is natural contemplation. The contemplation, seeing nature as it is, meaning the contemplation of the logoi. So only after one has been cleansed from many passions is one able to, when one sees creation, when one exists in the world, to really see, to contemplate God hidden in it, God's intention for the world in it, God's call, invitation for a dialogue via the world. So, when we speak philosophically of Maximus' system, we often forget that we are able to have a contemplation of the logoi after we do practical philosophy, we cleanse ourselves from the passions, etc., which we scholars usually have not done. So the theory of the logi, the theory of the logi remains a theory until we are cleansed. So this is also important in this system. You begin with cleansing oneself from the passions, from practical philosophy, from ascesis. Then you acquire the capacity to contemplate the logi, to recognize, that is, the world as the locus of your relationship with the uncreated world, God, even though the world is created. To see Christ in everything. To respond to God's call for a dialogical reciprocity. His opening bid in the dialogue being the world itself. And then the third part would come, the third part in this ladder, theological mystagogy, deification, theosis. That's the system in Maximus. So seeing God in this way is also part of this ladder.
Is the relation, do you see a correlation between this triad and the classical Palamite, and especially new Palamite, popular Palamite construction about how do you say, purification, cleansing, sanctification, and deification?
Yes, although I prefer Maximus.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Can you compare them?
It's quite easy to compare them. First of all, Palamas is also faithful to Maximus. The fathers are faithful to the patristic legacy before them. By definition, not Maximus, but Palamas and the Hesychasts receive a patristic tradition, which they do not change, they honor and further refine it, because they have to respond to a new problem. The problem posed by the claim that there can be no uncreated light, we cannot see that as created beings, etc. Also a problem of terminology, of course, with how theology had developed in the West, with the Aquinas system, etc. So purification is the common step in both cases. Then they speak of sanctification. The Palamites and Neo-Palamites, sanctification is the word.
The second step is the one, yes.
But what is the semantic content of that term? Well, the first and the third are very clear. Purification, which is identical to the practical philosophy, to cleansing oneself from the passions. Deification is obviously theological mystagogy, the same.
Enlightenment as well, being enlightened.
The contemplation of the logi, by being acquired. Yes. Natural, physική θεωρία, natural contemplation. That is, nature as it is, with the logi of God. So, this is becoming enlightened, because this is natural contemplation, the contemplation of the logi, seeing for the first time the world as it indeed is, as this dialogue that God, seeing God not in creation, it's not pantheism and it's not panentheism, but seeing the properly uncreated God via creation in the same way. Let me put it thusly. Let me make another example. So, just to move to the example which is on a different topic, the answer is yes. The answer is yes. You might have seen pictures of Van Gogh, pictures painted by Van Gogh or whatever, some famous painter. Okay. Then at some point, even if you see a new painting and it just happens to be from that same painter, you will recognize it. You will not recognize it in the same way that AI would recognize it, simply by fragmenting certain criteria. There is also, we hope and believe, something particularly human in seeing the otherness of the artist in the artistic creation. Okay. We hope that there's something distinctively human in that. So, you haven't met in your life Van Gogh, but by studying his paintings or a musical piece, or being inspired by the music of a dead artist, you might know this artist better than the baker in real life or the taxi driver would know them. You know more about that person, who that person's otherness is, who that person really is, than the baker that would meet them when they would try to buy bread, whatever, or the drivers, or whatever. etc. The same could be said, mutatis mutandis, for God and creation. We see something, the artistic creation is not of flesh and blood, it is either oil painting on canvas or musical compositions, recording, so it is of a different nature than the artist. So, the world being created is obviously of a different nature than the uncreated God. But mutatis mutandis, it has this relationship as the painter and the painting. We see in the creation of God, God hidden in it, in the same way that we see the painter or the artist hidden in the musical piece, even though what we see is of a different nature. It is not a human being speaking, it is oil and painting. It is not the uncreated God, it is created order. Rocks, humans, finite beings, you name it, etc. And the artist also wants to speak to you. The artist creates an artistic product for somebody, for an audience, and that audience, he or she might be dead when it reaches that audience, but the relationship persists and endures in a certain way. We don't know the metaphysical reality of but we know that when we speak to saints, or that is what the Church says, that in spite of the fact that they are bodily not alive, that we still converse, that we still actually address a living, in a certain way, person. So, seeing the world as it is in natural contemplation, enlightenment is precisely seeing the painter, yes. Recognizing the painter in the painting, and recognizing that the painting, as it were, reality, the world, makes sense only if it is seen in its active relationship to the one who created it, and created it for somebody, for you in particular, not only for an abstract humanity, but for your person. God initiates with creation a dialogue with you in particular, not only with a generic humanity, but also with a generic humanity, also with humanity as a whole, with human nature, but also with you in particular. But some purification is necessary for us to truly see that and recognize that. In this ladder, from purification or practical philosophy or the cleansing of the passions, to being granted the capacity to indeed be enlightened, to witness the world as it is, in the sense contemplate the logi. And then to deification, Maximus speaks of it also taking on Aristotelian categories in terms of motion. So at some point, the end result is motion ending, repose, fixity, stopping, etc. But God is not simply immobile, because again, motion and lack of motion and fixity are created notions. Mm-hmm. God is not simply the antithesis of createdness. So if created beings are in motion, God is motionless. Motionless is not a word that suffices, because it's the uncreated order. Only apophatically and analogically can we use such words that, things are in movement, which also means in corruption, etc., in changing. God does not change, so God does not move. All these are partial notions. So Maximus speaks of that theological mystagogy, that deification, etc., as an ever-moving repose. So it's a stasis aikinitos. Theoretically, it's a paradox. Yes. Paradox. Stasis, fixity, not anymore being in motion and in corruption and in changing, etc., but ever-moving motion around that which is the most, to pantos epheton, the epitome of what is to be desired. So he paints a picture of an ever-moving repose, a dance around God, as it were. And this is the picture that he paints, also in very metaphysically precise philosophical categories for deification. Not a fixity, not a stop, but an ever-moving repose, an ever-moving situation.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
All right. So, I think our time is also out, and I want to thank you very much,
Thank you all.
Sotiri, and I want to thank, in absence, also our other guest, Dionisios Skliriis. I thank both, and I thank you for being here with us on this lecture.
May I end with some book recommendations, or is it superfluous right now?
I think not.
I
think
not
it is
superfluous.
not superfluous.
Okay, good. So, just if this piqued your interest, a few things. First of all, last of all, but just to take this off the table, you can find my book on Maximus for free, the PDF, by Googling the following: bit.ly/evermoving. But please don't share this link, because the publisher will absolutely crucify me. So bit.ly/evermoving. So my take on Maximus is this. Yes, precisely. So this is the PDF of the book. Now, Maximian scholarship proper started with a book that still holds today as very good. Lars Thunberg. There is also the Catholic, of course, Hans Urs von Balthasar, Cosmic Liturgy, but a book from phase one of Maximian scholarship, as it were, that still stands today as an extremely important book for the anthropology of Maximus is Lars Thunberg, Microcosm Mediator. Then we have Andrew Louth with his books on introducing Maximus. Then we have Thorstein Tollefsen, another Norwegian who is also, for some reason you have this Scandinavian Maximus, Scandinavian countries and Maximus, who was a disciple of Lars Thunberg. He has written 3 or 4 books on Maximus, most of them by Oxford University Press, and in philosophy. He's a professor of philosophy, Thorstein Tollefsen. What other book should I in English? Of course, there is a difficult thing here, but for me, he's one of the 2 best systematic Orthodox theologians today globally, my opinion. Nikolaos Ludovikos, his books, Analogical Identity, Church in the Making, they are not on Maximus, although he has published his PhD on Maximus, which is called A Eucharistic Ontology. A Eucharistic Ontology. All this may be found pirated for free, of course, if I'm allowed to say that in a university setting, etc. So there is Ludovikos' A Eucharistic Ontology. And well, starting from this book is more than enough, I think, for Maximus. Now, if one wants to read Maximus directly, for starters, I would say simply take the Ambigua, which is published in English by Harvard University Press with a Greek text adjacent, so you have the original text and a good translation, as difficulties in the Church Fathers. The Ambigua or Mystagogy, these are good starting points. Or even small. For example, he has written a small text, an exposition on Our Father, the prayer, Our Father who art in heaven. This is more theologically and philosophically dense than you might think by thinking, a commentary on Our Father. And I suppose that this would be available online, even in a Macedonian translation, most probably, certainly in English translation. Just by Googling, you may find this. So, thank you very much again. Sorry for taking some extra time to propose books.
Thank you. It was really enjoyable for me. I hope also for the others. So, thank you once again.
Thank you.